So I just want to orient you to some definitions of things we'll be talking about. I'll be talking a lot about the autonomic nervous system, which was very much impounded in me as the structure influencing function in my medical training. And our autonomic nervous system is the part of our brain body connection that we don't have to think about. However, as it was alluded to earlier with belief and mindset and, hypnotherapy as a technique to sort of undo these subconscious patterns in our bodies, our thoughts really do govern our ability to sort of experience these autonomic functions in our body. And I will share with you all the details about that, but just know your nervous system, your brain, your eyes, your ears, your voice, events that happen to you in your life, all of these things shape those internal subconscious belief patterns and dictate your autonomic nervous system. Another concept here is emergence processing. So this is that multiple things are happening simultaneously to you, for you, around you in order to have an experience. And so when we talk about gut health, it's not just the food we're eating. It's so much more than that. And we'll dive deeper on that. And then the microbiome, I hope you guys are all familiar with the ice cream emoji that looks like a pile of poop. That has become one of my favorite sort of stamps or logos whenever I talk about the microbiome, because look how happy this little poop is. He has a big smiley face on him. And, that's sort of my goal here, is to inspire you to have a happy stool. A happy stool is a happy body. So do you believe in the mind-body connection? Our gut, our brain, and our immune and endocrine systems are connected. So what is our immune system? It's how our bodies sort of mount an immune response. We can think about colds, flus, things like that. We can think about autoimmune disease, arthritis. So there's a whole constellation, if you will, lots of different players and characters. I love the acting analogy. Sometimes I use, like you have a mailman, you have the delivery person, you have the person in shipping and packaging, you have the people in, construction, research and development. Our immune system is this whole network of beings that are constantly working to screen what's happening inside. And the biggest part of our immune system is actually in the gut. The endocrine system, this is hormones, this is neurotransmitters, this is serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and all of the parts of us that, again, pharmacology thinks that we need medications for. So the central nervous system, which is kind of the governor of the autonomic nervous system, is a bidirectional highway, 2 lanes. We have information coming from the brain down to the body, and we have information coming from the body back up to the brain. And so this is part of that emergence kind of processing piece there, is that everything is interrelated. The vagus nerve is specifically what we're going to kind of highlight and its major functions. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that dictates when we are restful, when we can digest our food well, when we feel safe, and when we don't feel threatened. So this is like the opposite of anxiety, the opposite of having, really high blood pressure. And this is really what is needed for us to experience good health, is the ability to fluctuate between a parasympathetic, restful, safe state, and then also the capacity for our nervous system to then also experience a sympathetic state. Sympathetic state is known as fight or flight. Again, being on high alert, sensing a threat. I think the best analogy is like a gazelle or a zebra. They'll go to the watering hole in Africa. Even though there's lions running around, they don't really worry about these issues until they're physically being chased. And so they can quickly switch from a parasympathetic state to a sympathetic state. And again, as humans, we're complicated because our thoughts and our subconscious beliefs can really dictate sort of how we experience life. And if we are always in a sympathetic state, we're really not optimizing blood flow to the stomach, blood flow to our digestive organs, Our heart rate might be elevated. We might feel tense. But when we're in a parasympathetic state, that's when all of our hormones in the body can really work synergistically for us to properly digest our food. So when we're in the sympathetic state, imagine yourself running. I love exercise as a good example, because when we exercise, we are conditionally and consciously putting ourselves in a sympathetic state, but we're doing it from a place of a lot of awareness and a lot of purpose, which is different than sometimes when people have like a PTSD type reaction. You know, when people experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and again, these are medical jargon, and there's a lot of variations of this experience, but sometimes all we need is a smell, a sound, maybe a color. You know, we can think about our war veterans. If there's a loud noise, you know, their body has memory. And so when we're exercising, it's much different than these sort of subconscious sort of patternings that that can happen in the body, but instead it's a conscious drive. We're consciously moving our body. When we stand, when we walk, when we run, when we ride our bike, we are in more of a sympathetic state, and our blood flow actually gets diverted to our muscles so that we can do this type of activity. If we were to be threatened, let's say we're a zebra and the lion is coming towards us and we need to run, same thing, that sympathetic nervous system state kicks in, blood flow gets diverted away from our organs of digestion, goes to the heart so we can have our heartbeat go faster, our blood pressure will go up in this process, and our blood flow to the gut isn't as robust. So if you take all this together, know that you want to be in a rested nervous system state as you're eating and digesting your food so that you can have more blood flow and more of that hormonal immune connection processing well for you. Cortisol is the hormone of stress, and it naturally peaks throughout the day at least two times. We naturally have cortisol spikes, and those cortisol spikes are correlated with wakefulness and, again, our ability to sort of go about our day. And then the cortisol lulls are when we kind of feel tired, maybe like before bed, when we're going to sleep. And so this is all very natural and normal, but sometimes our bodies can become overstimulated with cortisol. And there's actually a pretty negative side effect to that. If we have cortisol activation, which again, we can do with our minds, then what's going to happen is the brain releases these hormones and they travel down the body through the vagus nerve and get released from some of these, other organs like our adrenal glands. And these hormones actually have an impact at the gut level where they cause leaky gut. And so that's another just kind of surprising fact, is that every human is conditionally susceptible to the negative effects of stress at the gut level. And when I say leaky gut, what happens is the gut is only one cell layer thick, and these gut cells are linked really closely tight together. And so when these hormones are circulating, it actually activates a certain protein, and it's like you're opening up the Panama Canal, and all those gut cells open up. And so whatever's going on at the gut level then leaks across that membrane. And so if it's undigested food, this is why a lot of people find that eating grains or even something like gluten, because those are just really hard to digest. So if you're experiencing stress and you're eating those foods, at that moment in time, bigger molecules are going to leak across the membrane, and then your immune system is going to start attacking them. And so that's really the mechanism behind, say, celiac disease or, gluten intolerance, which is why you probably lost 7 pounds by eating an all carnivore diet, because meat and animal products, in the carnivorous category, it really doesn't take a lot of effort to digest them, and they don't stimulate the immune system the same way that some of your grains and bean skins can. So in the parasympathetic state, it's kind of like the opposite happens. We now have more blood flow going to the GI tract. Our heart rate can be kind of slower. We don't feel like we're huffing and puffing because we don't need to run. We actually have more saliva that gets stimulated, and saliva has a lot of digestive enzymes in it that help us digest our food. In the stomach here, peristalsis is the word that describes how the intestines contract and move food from mouth to anus, which is really important. You want to have healthy peristalsis so you can have that happy, healthy bowel movement. Bile release here from the gallbladder and from the liver. All of these things are, again, really important for breaking down your food and absorbing these nutrients. So I mentioned exercise as an example, and then I mentioned PTSD as like another kind of far-reaching example, but our body, so hormesis means that we are constantly in flux. So we're moving from one state to the other, and we're never perfectly all one or all the other, except for in really rare, extreme circumstances. If somebody faints, so say somebody gets their blood drawn and the needle comes out and they actually pass out, we call that a vagal response. And it's a fear-based response. That person got so afraid that they almost like faked being dead. And you see this in animals. Again, a lion will be chasing a gazelle. That gazelle will be tackled. That gazelle will actually faint and almost play dead. That lion, because they're apex predators and they kind of kill for fun sometimes, if they get distracted or if they're not that hungry, once they think that they're dead, they'll actually walk away. And there's some really fascinating videos of this phenomenon all over YouTube, if you're so inclined. And then our sympathetic nervous system, which again is normal, healthy, and good for us, but if it gets overactivated, so in either one of these scenarios, hormesis means that there's a beneficial dose of physiology where we swing from one into the other, maybe not perfectly on one or perfectly on the other. We can be standing and upright and alert, but we can still be able to eat our lunch when we're in that parasympathetic state. But if it gets too much, then we're either passing out or our heart is in a arrhythmia. That's called supraventricular tachycardia. And a lot of my patients with obesity do experience both of these extremes pretty often. So the anatomy of digestion, I think it's helpful to know. As you can see, lots of hormones. I actually can tell you what all these hormones do, but for today, I won't bore you with that. But the vagal nerve, which goes to the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the nose. The nose is actually one of the fastest ways to create a memory response in the brain. And then our throat, our vocal box, our thyroid, our breathing. So it's not necessarily the diaphragm, but it's how well our lungs can sort of open and accept oxygen or how constricted they can be. And then all the organs down here below the abdomen, mouth, esophagus, stomach, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, colon, all of these different sites of digestion have different roles, responsibilities. Again, your immune system is splattered here throughout all of this. But they all have different functions in terms of what they absorb, what hormones they secrete, what vitamins they absorb, and then their overall function. So absorption. So this is a snapshot here of what the intestine looks like. It is literally shag carpet. And it's estimated that if you take the intestine of a human and you stretch it flat, it actually takes up the surface area of 2 tennis courts. So I just want to emphasize how important digestion is for your body, how important it is to make sure that you are eating the correct foods for your body. But I don't want to overemphasize the food part because we also need to take care of our mind, our thoughts, our beliefs, some of those subconscious beliefs. And we need to make sure that our nervous system can feel regulated. Having a regulated nervous system means we have a healthy swing of going from parasympathetic to sympathetic state. And that's all very important for this whole process. I just want to make a plug here. Ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is one of the most toxic medications that I think a lot of people use because it's so accessible over the counter and it's so effective at helping people treat pain, but it actually contributes to the inflammatory process in the gut. So ibuprofen is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and that's what NSAID stands for, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And so what can happen is the protective lining, it's a mucus layer. There's a protective lining here that coats our entire GI tract. And by taking this medicine, it actually stops your body from making a healthy protective layer. And that becomes really important because under these conditions where we have stress, our gentleman who had the accident the other gentleman who had the surgery. Those are very stressful events to the body. And those are ones that, again, you don't have conscious control of. They just happen to your body. So under those states of stress, your cortisol likely spiked. Under states of undergoing surgery, if you don't have a kind, compassionate anesthesiologist, I love that Anthony Cava's videos. I can't wait to watch those. But that process is a very vulnerable time, and we give you a lot of medications, and people are often very fearful of any kind of surgery. So if we can help as providers nurture their nervous system, help them go into those experiences in more of a calm, safe, parasympathetic state, then we're not going to conditionally create more problems. So that stress response, if you don't have a healthy mucus layer, the effects of poor digestion, inflammation, the GI issues that one of your other participants brought up, all of those things can compound and create for a pretty miserable experience. So biochemistry, I had to show some of these slides just to really highlight the complexity of it all. As we're digesting our food, including protein, again, the carnivorous sort of claim there that a carnivore diet can heal GI issues is largely true because the amino acids, which are all the microproteins, make up the building blocks of every single hormonal system in the body. And these are neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters being like serotonin. Serotonin is what people take antidepressants for, but I have some very insightful news for you. If your internal gut system is not optimized, your antidepressants don't work, because serotonin isn't made by the brain, but it's actually made by gut bacteria in the GI tract. And it's made by gut bacteria in synergy, in collaboration with the food you eat, because the food you eat gives them the materials they need to then develop it. GABA is a wonderful hormone, and GABA is, if anybody has taking maybe Valium or something like that, Valium is a anti-anxiety medication. People can take that with their flying, or again, all those subconscious beliefs that put us into that hypersympathetic state. But what GABA is it's a regulator for the parasympathetic nervous system. And that really comes from our amino acids within the gut. This one here, L-glutamate, there's a lot of protein supplements. You can get just L-glutamate powder. L-glutamate is one of the key amino acids needed for healthy gut function and to help the body make this GABA. Now, you don't have to take all these supplements to do it. You can eat animal protein, you can do bone broth or soup stock. Those are wonderful ways to get all the amino acids you need so that you can really internally regulate yourself and your system. Serotonin, like I said, very essential for well-being. Serotonin is made up to 90% of it by the bacteria in the gut. And serotonin is also very necessary for melatonin production. So what I'm kind of talking about now is called functional medicine or functional nutrition, but understanding the biochemistry beyond what we were fed from the pharmaceutical industry, understanding that your body is capable of all of these mechanisms in and on its own, and then honoring your body and doing it correctly. So tryptophan is another amino acid. It's very high in turkey, and not even just turkey meat, but again, the bones, the collagen, the joints, organ meat. So if you're on a carnivorous diet, I highly recommend you don't just eat the muscle of animals, but you go so far as doing liver and then these bone broths and soup stocks to really make sure that you're getting the full complement of nutrients from these animals. But so tryptophan is one of our precursors to serotonin. Serotonin is one of our precursors to melatonin. And so without a really healthy gut environment, we're also going to ruin our ability to sleep. And when we get poor sleep, then we also have higher rates of stress and those cortisol response. We actually need to be totally in that parasympathetic state, sleeping, rejuvenating. Our whole nervous system goes through a big reprogramming and reset with good sleep. Food cravings go through the roof. And a lot of people report just eating carbohydrates or feeling like they're craving carbohydrates all day long. And that's just not what the gut needs. So I'll now transition to the gut microbiome here a little bit more. These are the organisms that live in the gut and really work in synergy with the diet and with the nervous system to make sure that our bodies are functioning their best. The gut is called the forgotten organ because it really has only gotten a lot of press, a lot of research in the last 10 to 20 years, really. It's also called the second brain because as we've mapped it out, we realize, wow, the gut actually has more neurons than our actual brain. And for every one nerve that goes from the brain to the gut, there's 9 more connections going from our gut back up to our brain. And I'm just going to hopefully passionately get you excited about this. Our second genome. So that's the microbiome themselves. So they create genes and these genetic material then interact with our cells. And so every cell in the human body only lives a finite period of time. And what happens is as the cell is getting ready to live out its life, it duplicates and makes a copy of itself. And so in the process of making a copy for itself, medicine calls this epigenetics. This is the impact that our environment, our nervous system, our thoughts, beliefs, and our diet have on how we can either stay healthy and age gracefully or accelerate aging, become inflamed, maybe have obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, etc. And I've taken this so far as our bacteria really are our oldest living ancestors on this planet. If you think back, you have a climate change talk coming up soon, but when you really map out time and what's happened with the oxygen content, plants, the evolution of plants, bacteria are really what have driven the evolution of every single animal on the planet. Another fun fact for you, the human organism has the most diversity. I mentioned diversity being a really exciting thing that I was witnessing here in your group, just all your different backgrounds and expertise. Diversity is what makes the gut microbiome so special, and it's what gives us our oomph. There's even some evolutionary biologists out there at the PhD level that speculate that all of our thoughts and beliefs are actually governed by bacteria. It's kind of exciting. I just listed some references here for you. The microbiome diet plan, as you can see, there's a lot of plant foods on it. And then this is, the microbiome diet, fermented foods. So I'm a big believer in, in nature throughout millennia, we've never needed to encapsulate probiotics and take them. That's just never needed to happen. Of course, now we live in a capitalistic society where we're all science driven and you have a large pharmaceutical industry. And so there's a lot of excitement over sort of culturing these bacteria and putting them into capsules and making it easier for people to take. But really, you don't need to do any of that. Traditional yogurt, Nancy's is one of my favorite brands. It's made right here in Oregon. It's a naturally fermented dairy product. Some cheeses are naturally fermented, sauerkraut, certain pickled vegetables. Almost every culture around the world has some version of fermented food. And you don't need to eat a lot of this stuff. It's really just a little bit. A little bit goes a long way, but it's a natural way for us to interact with these beneficial bacteria in the body. So again, the gut microbiome, the gut itself, 2 tennis courts worth of surface area. Our colon is the site where most of the bacteria live. So I'll just go through this infographic here, but 90% of all disease can be traced in some way back to gut health and the microbiome, the other 10% being purely genetic. It's estimated that 10 to 100 trillion is the number of beneficial or symbiotic bacteria that live in the human gut. And like I said, what we're realizing is it's the genetic material, the work that the bacteria are doing for us is really what governs our health. And I also like to remind people, your biology, even though we're understanding these new mechanisms, it really hasn't changed. It's just this information is really highlighting that food is medicine and that as humans, we have an ability to correlate to one another and lift each other up for positive stress response. And that's really the big takeaway here. It is estimated that the genes that our bacteria produce outnumber our human genes 100 to 1. Whoa. And that we have greater than 10,000 different species inhabiting our body. The human body is the most diverse site of bacterial populations in the whole world. And that's from soil samples at the bottom of the ocean. That's from bowel samples from other animals. Humans have the ability to eat and live anywhere in the world. We're very nomadic. We can eat animal protein, we can eat plant protein, we can fast for a decent long time. But the human body is one of the most diverse ecosystems. 99.9% of people differ in the types of bacteria that inhabit them. And that is now being thought that your natural genetic makeup, your neuroendocrine milieu, so to speak, like what makes you a unique individual, actually attracts certain organisms, and then you start breeding your own universe of bacteria within you. It's very, very fascinating. Some of this research came out of the University of Oregon, just down here in Eugene. And so while people have a lot of similarity in their genetic makeup, we have a lot of diversity in terms of what inhabits us and how those genes by these bacteria interact with us. Some other things that have came up in the most recent history is that the placenta, so a lot of our microbiome development and a lot of our imprinting of our nervous system actually begins when mothers are carrying a fetus, or, so if you can imagine I like to make this personal, imagine your mother, imagine what conditions of health and of diet and this whole process your mother was in while she was pregnant with you. That can dictate your setup for your immune function for the rest of your life. And that part can sometimes feel a little threatening, scary, or vulnerable because that's so out of your control. But if a mother were to get a dental infection or even a urinary tract infection, that can seed into the blood, that can seed into the placenta. And it's thought that all premature births are largely because of these bacterial interactions here in utero. There's another big factor here, which is, were you born by vaginal delivery or were you born by cesarean? I could have a whole hour lecture of the psychological and immune impacts of being born cesarean versus vaginal. And also, since I'm on this call with a bunch of baby boomers, as I heard you call, if you can think about the care models around delivery then, a lot of women were treated poorly in the birth process. A lot of babies were taken away from their mothers right after birth and put in a nursery. Those types of environments are actually pretty destructive to our immune system, and especially cesarean. So cesarean delivery really kicked off in America in about the late 40s, early 50s. And the NIH published a study a couple of years ago demonstrating the impact on type 2 diabetes. Being born by cesarean increases your risk of diabetes by almost 50%. And again, some of these mechanisms are to play because as a baby is born through the vaginal canal, that baby then actually makes contact with very specific bacteria in the mother's vagina. And without them, they're pulled out through the abdomen. They make contact with skin organisms, and it's not ideal. Breastfeeding is a lot better than bottle feeding because the breast milk of a mother actually changes depending on the week or the day of development and including the hour. And what is really neat about breast milk is that breast milk has probiotic bacteria in it naturally. So, wow, how does colon and small intestine organisms make it to breast milk? It does that through our bloodstream and through that gut level of like what's permeable and what's not. Permeable is the medical term for how open something is. And again, just like that Hormesis curve, it needs to be open at the right times to the right things in order to be healthy. And all of that comes down to nervous system regulation and making sure that we're eating the right foods that promote healthy bacteria diversity. Antibiotics and different medications. I already mentioned the ibuprofen being pretty toxic for the gut barrier, but antibiotics, which I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, doctors were overprescribing antibiotics. And I'm sure many of you have had antibiotics many times in your life. It's just a byproduct of where we were in history. And anymore, doctors are really realizing that they need to be very judicious and careful with how they prescribe antibiotics, because they kill not just a very targeted type of bacteria, but it might kill an entire family or population of bacteria that also do good things for us. So while antibiotics, and as a surgeon who, treats sepsis and infections and things, and even with cesareans, I take the position, while these are very beneficial things that promote health and are life-saving, it's just, I'm very grateful that now we have more science to understand the complications and consequences of using them. And through this understanding, we also know how to rehabilitate and repair. I mentioned diet effects, environment effects. We could go into, pesticides, we could go into chlorine. There's a lot of chemicals in our environment, but also just that nervous system piece. And I really do believe that if we have a healthy, intact nervous system, we won't have any gut issues. So how does all of this impact everything? This is just another infographic that I think can really convey the story altogether and how these things are interacted. But stress. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is when I was in medical school, I was experiencing significant stress, as we all are. But what was happening is I also had what's called dysbiosis. So I had a parasite in my gut. And at the time I was on, this is a little TMI, but most young women are on oral contraceptive pills. Even oral contraceptive pills negatively impact the gut microbiome. And so all of these things together, the stress, not having, really healthy populations of gut bacteria, that whole process of how those neurotransmitters impact stress, impact sleep through the serotonin pathways, those GABA pathways, it's a process that keeps feeding itself. And then you get bloating, abdominal pain, and then you get anxiety, and then you don't sleep very well. All of these things are correlated with each other. And like I said, it's a very exciting time to understand these things. Here's another fascinating tidbit of information that, forgive me if the slide's so busy, but bacteria themselves. So again, you have up to 100,000 different species of bacteria that live inside your body at any given time. They're all a little bit different. They all make different genetic material. Some of them work in, cohesion with each other to then have a positive effect on you. And they can sense. So this is how they sense from your nervous system, that cortisol response. But they sense from each other. So they're in communication with each other through releasing chemicals, the same chemicals that regulate your immune system, the same chemicals that regulate, your hormones in your body. So they sense things. And so when they sense a disruption in your physiology, like that traumatic accident with the tibia fracture, then a whole bunch of things happen, and the bacteria themselves turn on different genes that then activate your immune system. These are a bunch of medical words that just highlight how many different types of immune cells there are: T regulatory cells, toll-like receptors, chemokines, cytokines, dendritic cells, macrophages. I know that's probably over your head, but there is a whole laundry list of all these different players in the body. Not only do they sense from you what's going on, but they can also communicate to each other. So the bacteria can then release those chemicals, which they're then sensed by other ones. And this is just how they communicate. When they get a quorum, a majority of them are sensing and reacting to the host physiology in a certain way. Then that leaky gut phenomenon, that permeability sort of mechanism can really ramp up. And this was a study that came out of a trauma center in Michigan, but they identified that within 2 hours after, say, a traumatic accident where maybe somebody breaks their femur, there's blood loss, they got called in by 911, now they're in the emergency department, there's a little bit of fear going on, their heart rate's really elevated. Again, all those chemicals are circulating through the body. Just within 2 hours, opportunistic are bacteria that want to out-survive you. Those are like bacteria like E. coli. And again, E. coli is one of the oldest bacteria that have been on this planet, and they live in all mammals, but they can get into the bloodstream. And this is how you can get sepsis from just about anything through these mechanisms. To take all of this a step further, there have been rat studies. These rat studies, they're not very applicable to humans perfectly because these are lab rats. So they are, genetically bred to be very similar. And then they're maintained in sterile environments. A mice out in the wild is running through a field, munching on dirt. There's a lot of beneficial probiotic organisms that live in our dirt, on our food, which is why not just eating animal protein, but also diversifying your diet with more plants is beneficial when you have a healthy nervous system. But what they did is they put these rats in a beaker of water and they tested how long can they swim. And what they found is that lab rats give up pretty quickly. And so this is just again, a proxy measure of that stress response. And then they put them, so then they had a control group. So they gave them a probiotic called lactobacillus, and the control group got nothing. And then what they did is they studied that GABA hormone, that parasympathetic, I am calm, I'm relaxed hormone. And the rats that had the lactobacillus actually had the most GABA. And when they put them in the beaker of water, they swam for longer. And that was statistically significant, that they swam long enough where it was perceived that they were having a better stress response. The control mice that didn't get the lactobacillus, they had very low GABA. Then they took it a step further and they actually cut the vagus nerve. And I showed you how important the vagus nerve is for that bidirectional communication. So the rats that were fed the probiotic and the rats that weren't, after cutting the vagus nerve, they all behaved like the rats that never got the probiotic. And so this was really the first demonstration of this bidirectional communication and also the impact that having some of these probiotic organisms in our diet had for us. So now probiotics got relabeled as psychobiotics because it was determined that through manipulation of the gut microbiome, we can have positive effects. And I wish that this information came out before the pharmaceutical invention of antidepressants, but here we are. This was another study. This was the first randomized controlled trial, which is kind of the echelon, if you will, the gold standard of how we apply pharmaceutical research. So they take a bunch of patients and they randomize healthy volunteers to 4 weeks of a commercial probiotic. This commercial probiotic is a multi-strain. These are all the different organisms here. And like I shared with you, you don't have to take a capsule. All of these bacteria are what are commonly found in kefir or kefir. And again, Nancy's is my favorite brand. But anyway, so they randomized these volunteers. They took this probiotic, half of them didn't, for 4 weeks. And then they did functional brain scanning. And then they had them fill out emotional questionnaires, kind of like a psychological assessment. And what they found is that those who were taking the multi-strain probiotic for those four weeks lit up new activity in the brain that is involved in emotional memory. And emotional memory is part of our nervous system and our ability to elicit a response either to that sympathetic state or that parasympathetic state. Or another way to think about it is how easily do you recover from sympathetic activation? And that's where I really like to talk about exercise, because exercise is training for your nervous system to recover, that notion of hormesis, right? So how does metabolic disease and gut health correlate? And this is where me as an obesity surgeon, I get really excited and I love to teach my patients all these things because I just want to empower them to be really mindful and aware of their experience. But bacteria can control calorie uptake from food and can actually dictate weight gain. Our food choices can feed beneficial bacteria, and our food choices in collaboration with our nervous system can also dictate how leaky the gut is and how well we may or may not be able to digest our food. Bad bacteria, and I do that in air quotes because it's really hard right now in science to label a specific bacteria as good or bad. What is now taking off in science is this genetic function. So what are the metabolites? What are those anti-inflammatory chemicals we're finding in the stool, in the blood? And that is more of a realization that the type of bacteria can be good or bad depending on the environmental conditions that are happening within our body. But when bacteria are tipped towards the unhealthy sort of side, and again, by all these external mechanisms, then they create inflammation, they disrupt our hormones of metabolism. That first, or several slides ago, when I showed all the hormones and the steps of digestion, there was cholecystokinin, glucopeptide like 1, protein YY or peptide YY. All of these hormones are involved to regulate how hungry we are, food cravings, appetite, and then they directly feed into sometimes even our sex hormones. So estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, thyroid. So a lot of thyroid disease is all now being traced back to this inflammatory condition in the gut. Life events, as I said, through the birth process, traumatic events, because we store emotional memory in our mind, and then our vagus nerve, which is constantly trying to protect us from, experiencing those things again. So if our nervous system is activated to alert us to safety, depending on our previous events, we might have a skewed idea of what is safe and what is not. It's very fascinating. With obesity, these same mechanisms that are regulated by, and again, obesity, you can call it 2 pounds, you can call it 7 pounds. It's constantly a moving target, but obesity really is the over accumulation of body fat that then puts you at risk for a bunch of other diseases: diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, arthritis. And so it's this exact same mechanisms in the gut that can control that. So nutrition is simple. Somebody asked that they're hoping to get some takeaways here. Whole foods, as you can see, all the animal protein is fine. That's actually one of the easier things to sort of digest and assimilate into those amino acids. Animal protein is always a complete protein. You're going to get the full complement of amino acids to do that. And then vegetables. So all the vegetables is really important, but you need to make sure that you have a nervous system state that is not leaky, and that your food is properly prepared for you. So cooked food is often easier to digest, easier to chew than non-cooked food. But at the same time, the more robust our nervous system is, the healthier our digestion is, the more digestive enzymes we secrete, the lower our cortisol is, the easier it is for us to have a nice, healthy gut barrier, the least medications we take, the least disruption to those internal mechanisms as far as hormonal regulation. And again, I'm trying to summarize this here in a short period of time, but there's a whole wealth of mechanisms, pathways, and information here about how all of these things work together. Not this, right? So microwavable TV dinners, all of our processed food. I didn't dare put pictures of McDonald's or fast food on here. None of this food has anything in it that nurtures or grows healthy gut bacteria or honors and nurtures our ability to get amino acids and all those building blocks to all those hormonal mechanisms. So there you go. And I would like to say what I practice is just sort of an evolved level of obesity care and weight management and just healthcare in general. This is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And again, with today's modern understanding, what happens in our physiology, our food, water, shelter, is directly related to our safety. However, it's how we perceive safety. And recognizing all of these things together, I would actually rebuild the pyramid and put these two things side by side, knowing what we know about the gut-brain connection. So diet is absolutely important. Exercise is important. It's nervous system training, behavioral health, our thoughts, our beliefs, our subconscious patterning, and then being able to recognize within your own system, when do you experience stress? How do you experience stress? And, can you change your beliefs around that? Bariatric surgery, which is what I do, I'm here to remove the stigma. Bariatric surgery is a tool. It's a tool for people that have this level of obesity, which is genetic, family history, environment, gut microbiome. But we can really use bariatric surgery as a tool to help change the hormonal mechanisms within the body. And there's a lot of really good evidence of that. Our bariatric surgeries also alter the gut microbiome for favorable weight loss, inflammation. Our patients go on a special diet after surgery. They have a lot of restriction. They eat less calories. And then there's also a lot of medications that are now mimicking some of the hormones that we find that regulate appetite and this glucose, which is blood sugar. And then long-term support. So another reason why I found Anastasia Lipsky to support me in my speaking and getting on podcasting is I've started a health and wellness company online called The Art of Bariatrics, where I really educate and teach people about all of these mechanisms involved and try to empower people that they can heal themselves. And just restricting calories, but without changing everything else, really, it's not the complete picture. And I think that's why so many people fail on weight loss diets. So if you want to hear more, because I have so much more, I actually have a 4-hour series that I spend more time talking about these concepts on YouTube. And all you have to do is Google my name, Dr. Erika La Vella, on YouTube. The 4-hour series, I titled it Primordial Paradigm, because primordial being this ancestral connection to these bacteria, and the paradigm being just how our whole body and our nervous system interacts with these organisms. And there's part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. And then I am now a podcast speaker where I talk a lot about these issues, women's health, chronic pain, weight loss, obesity, and nervous system regulation. I am a guest on several podcasts themed that way. And then if you know anybody who's had bariatric surgery and you see that they're not thriving, maybe they need more support, again, you can send them to Art of Bariatrics, artofbariatrics.com. And that's where we have online courses, education, meal plans. All of our meal plans are very gut friendly. And we also offer coaching services. And these are some references, and I don't